Hello and welcome to this tutorial, and in this tutorial we are going to design a simple stopwatch application. So in this tutorial we'll be dealing with creating the user interface for our application, how we could design the user interface for our stopwatch application, how to make it look better, and how to assign IDs to the buttons and the text views. So the first thing which we need to do in order to create a stopwatch application is that we need to actually start a new Android Studio project. So we simply select this option right here, which is start a new Android Studio project. And let's name this application as my stopwatch. Then click next and make sure that you select the API level 15 so that your app performs properly. Then click next. Then we are going to choose the blank activity and let's name this activity as activity underscore stopwatch. Then we click finish. So as you could see, this is the layout of our application, and the next thing which we need to do is that we need to make this layout look better. So the first thing which we do is that we delete the hello world and we are going to add a background to our stopwatch layout so as to make it look better. So what I have done is that I've already downloaded an image from the internet, which is going to be this, and this is actually going to be the background of our application, and it is going to provide a better look and feel to our application. So make sure that you have a PNG image downloaded on your device so that you could use it in your application. Now the next thing is that we actually need to import this image into the Android Studio. So we simply right click on it, we then copy the image, return back to Android Studio, go to the app folder, go to the resources folder, go to drawable, right click on it and simply paste the image right over here. And let's name this image as image.png, then click OK. And as you could see, the image has been added into the drawable folder. Now the next thing which we need to do is that we actually need to use the imported image in our application. So for that we simply select the relative layout, that is because we want to add our image as a background to the relative layout. Then we go into properties and we are going to select the property which is called as background. So we simply click on this button and a small window is going to pop up. Now inside it we need to go into the project folder, that is because our file actually lies in this project folder. Then we scroll down and this is our image right here. So we simply select it and click OK. So as you could see, the background image has been successfully loaded onto our layout. Now the next thing which we need to do is that we actually need to have some buttons and text views so as to display the time, as well as we also need to add functionality to our application so that the user could start the stopwatch, he could stop it, as well as he could reset it. So in order to do that, the first thing which we do is that we drag a large text view onto our layout. So select this large text and place it right over here. Now this large text is actually going to display the time in hours, minutes and seconds. Now the next thing which we need to do is that we actually need to provide buttons. We actually need to provide 3 buttons, one for start, one for stop and one for reset. So simply drag a button from here and drop it right over here. This is going to be the start button. This one is going to be the stop button, and the third and the final one is going to be for reset. So once we have these 3 buttons, now the next thing which we do is that we actually assign IDs to these buttons as well as change their names. So the first thing which we do is that we actually change the names of this button. So simply select the first button, go to properties and let's change the text to start. Let's change the text of this button to stop. And for this button we are going to change the text to reset. So as you could see, the text has been changed. Now the next thing which we need to do is that we are going to actually add some methods onto these 3 buttons, but before adding methods to these we actually need references to these buttons. So it is always better that we assign the ID to these buttons. So we simply go to the first button, then go to properties, and inside the properties we are looking for a property which is called as an ID. So as you could see, this is the ID right here. Now change this ID to, let's say, start button. Similarly change the ID of this button to stop button, and it is going to pop up a small dialog box. So simply select don't ask, click yes, and for the second button we are going to change this ID to stop button. And for the third and final one, we are going to set the ID to reset button. So make sure that you change this ID to reset button. So once we have changed the ID of all three of these, the next thing which we need to do is that we actually need to change the ID of this large text right here. So we simply select this, and inside the ID, let's say we name the ID as time view, as this is going to display the time. So once everything is done, the next thing which we need to do is that we actually need to change the size of this text, as this text appears to be very small, and it is actually better if we have a large text for the time over here. So we could actually change the text from properties, but just for the sake of understanding, we are going to change the text size of this text view right here from the XML. So we switch to the XML view, and this is our text view right here. And in order to change the text view size, we simply go into this tag right here, and then we type in Android text size, which is the property which defines the size of the text. And for the size of the text, we are going to specify 92 SP. And I think this text size is going to be perfect for the stopwatch. So if we switch back to design view, as you could see, this is our text right here. Now the next thing which we need to do is that we actually need to clear up the text inside this. So we switch to text and we delete the text inside it. So initially this is actually going to be blank. So as you could see, this is the text view right here, and it actually shrunk, and that is because we have not specified anything in it. And if you go to properties, as you could see, the layout width and height is nothing but wrap content. So basically whatever content we are going to specify inside this text view right here, it is going to shrink the size according to the text which is mentioned inside it. So now once everything is done, the next thing which we need to do is that we actually need to have references, or we should have references to the strings of these buttons right here. And that is because it is actually going to show us warning if we don't have references. So it is always better to add string references to these buttons right here. So what we do is that we switch to this values folder, and we could find a file which is called as the strings.xml. So we simply open up this file, and inside it we are going to add 3 string resources. So the first one is going to be for the start. So we type string name equals start, and inside it we are going to specify start. For the second one, we are going to type string name equals stop and stop. And for the final string, we are going to type in string name equals reset and reset. So once we have added the string resources, the next thing which we need to do is that we need to reference these string resources into these buttons right here. So what we did is that we gave the name to these buttons directly. So instead of giving the names directly, we could always have a reference to the string which is stored in the strings.xml file. So if we switch to the XML view, as you could see that these are our 3 buttons which we have added, and instead of just directly specifying the text here, we could always add resources to it. So we type add string start. For this we are going to change it to add string stop, and for the final one we are going to replace it with add string reset. So now if we switch to design view, and if you simply select this button, as you could see, there is no light bulb on the left hand side, and that is because we actually did it the right way, that is by adding a string reference and then just pointing towards it. So the main reason for adding string resources is that, for example, if you develop an Android application, and now if the Android application is present in the English language, and actually you need to translate into some other language. So instead of going here and changing the text of each and every element right here on your application, what you could do is that you could simply go on to this strings.xml file, and you could simply translate each and every word in a particular language to some other language. So when we switch back to the layout, you could see that each and every word in a particular language is changed to the other language which you want. So that's it for this tutorial, and in the next tutorial we are actually going to add life to this application by giving or adding methods to all of the 3 buttons right here. So what we are going to do is that we are going to attach this start button with the start method. the stop one with the stop method, and the reset with the reset method. And finally, in those methods we are going to write the code to start, stop and reset the stopwatch. So in the previous tutorial we have actually designed the layout for our application. So we have just added an image to the background, we have added a text view, and as you could see there is no text view right here on the layout. But if you go right here in the component tree and right below the relative layout, as you could see there is a text view present here. But the thing is that as it does not have any content, it is going to display a blank over here. And we have also added 3 buttons onto our application to start, stop and reset the stopwatch. So actually we have not done any coding yet. So in this tutorial we are actually going to write in some code so as to make the app functional. So in order to make this app function as a stopwatch, we actually need to go ahead and add methods to these 3 buttons right here. And each method is going to perform its function. So for example, the start method is actually going to start the stopwatch. The stop method is actually going to stop the stopwatch, and for the reset method we want to reset the stopwatch, and actually we need to reset the time to the initial time as it was. So the first thing which we do is that we add methods, or we attach the methods to the on click of all the 3 buttons. So in order to do that, we select the first button, which is start. Then we go to properties and we are looking for a property which is called as the on click. So as you could see, this is our on click right here, and let's name the method as on click start, as this is going to start the stopwatch. Then we move on to the next button, which is stop, and to the on click we are going to add in a method which is called as on click stop. And for the third and final one, for the reset, we are going to change the on click to on click reset. So once everything is done, we are good to go, and we could actually write in some code for the start, stop and reset on click methods. So in order to write in the code, we need to switch on to our main Java file, which is this right here, which is activity_stopwatch.java. And if we switch to this file, as you could see, there is a bunch of code already added by Android Studio, and actually we don't need each and every bit of code. So actually we are going to clean up the code. It is always better to clean up your code and remove the things which you don't require, and it is going to make your application much more efficient. So this is the toolbar right here which we don't require, so we simply delete the entire toolbar. And also we don't need these methods as for now, so we delete them as well. And also it is better if you remove these import statements which are not currently required. So make sure that you delete everything which appears in a gray. So for example, as you could see, this text right here is appearing gray. So make sure that the content which appears gray is removed, and that is because we don't need it. So once the code is cleaned up, one more thing which we do is that instead of extending from the app compact activity, we are going to change this to just activity. And once everything is set up, the next thing which we need to do is that we need to add the methods which we have just attached to the on click of these 3 buttons right here. But before doing that, we actually need to declare 2 variables. The first variable is going to be to keep track of the seconds which we have to display in the stopwatch, and the second variable is going to be a boolean variable. That means it either has a value true or false, and we are going to name that variable as running. And the running variable is basically nothing but it is actually a variable to check the status if the stopwatch is running or not. So for example, if the running variable is true, that means our stopwatch is running, and whenever the running variable is false, that means our stopwatch is not running at the moment. So let's go ahead and add these variables. So we go right here inside this class and outside the onCreate method, and let's create our first variable. So we type private int, and let's name this variable as seconds. And initially we initialize it to 0, and that is because actually the very first time our application runs, we want to actually display that the time elapsed is 0. So we type private int seconds equals 0. So that's a basic variable declaration there. And the next variable which we want to use is going to be a boolean variable. So we type in private boolean, and let's name it as running. And once we have these 2 variables with us, we could go ahead and add the methods. So we go right below the onCreate method, and we are going to add up the 3 methods which we have just attached to the onClick of these 3 buttons. So if we switch to the start button, as you could see, this is the method which we have just added to the onClick. So we actually need to go ahead and define all these three methods inside the Java class. So make sure that you have the same name of the method which we have specified here. So we switch to Java class and then type public void onClick start, and inside it we are going to specify the parameter as view, as we actually need to pass in the view to any method, and actually we need to import it. So press Alt enter and it is going to automatically import the view for us. Now the next method which we need to add is going to be the onClick stop. So we type in public void onClick stop. Again we type in the view in the parameter section, and the final method which we are going to create is going to be the reset method, which is actually going to reset our stopwatch. So we type public void onClick reset, and again we are going to pass in the parameter as view. So once everything is done, we are good to go. And now the next thing which we need to do is that we actually need to add the code to all the three methods. So basically on clicking this button right here, the onClick start method is going to get invoked. That is, the code inside this method is going to get executed. So the first thing which we need to do is that we need to specify what happens when this method right here gets executed. So whenever the stopwatch starts, basically what we want to do is that we actually change the status of our stopwatch to be true. So actually we need to make this running equals true. So we type the same thing. So we type running equals true. And when the stopwatch actually stops, we need to make the running to be false. So we type running equals false. Make sure that you spell false correctly. And for the reset method, we actually need to make running to be false, and also we actually need to reset the timer. So we copy and paste this statement right here, which is running is going to be false, and also the seconds variable right here is again going to get initialized to 0. So basically whenever we reset the stopwatch, we actually need to reinitialize this variable to its first position, which is 0. So inside it we type seconds equals 0. So once this is done, we are good to go. And the next thing which we actually need to do is that we need to add one more method which is actually going to act as a timer. So in this methods, three methods right here, we have done few simple things. That is, we have actually changed the status of our variables, which is the running and the seconds variable, to true, false, and we have also resetted the time by initializing the variable seconds to 0. But as you could notice that this code actually does not perform any of the activities to changing the text view to a new time right here. And we are actually going to do that in a new method which is called as the Runtimer method, which we are eventually going to create. And the main reason which we have the main reason why we have created these three methods is basically in order to check the status of the stopwatch, and that is because everything depends upon the status of the stopwatch, and we actually need to have a track if the stopwatch is actually running and what is the current time. So this was the main significance of these three methods. And the next method which we are going to use, which is called as the Runtimer method, is actually going to be used to change the text view of this thing right here to the current time or the current running time of the stopwatch. So that's it for this tutorial, and in the next tutorial we'll be writing the code for the Runtimer method. And after we complete the code for the Runtimer method, the idea of the stopwatch would be more clear to you, that how the stopwatch actually performs and how it is going to change the time per second on this text view right here. So let's go ahead and create the new method which is called as the Runtimer method, so as to make our app functional. So let's go right below this onClick reset method, and here we are going to add in our new method. So let's type in private void, and this method is actually going to contain the code which controls the entire stopwatch. So the first thing which we need to do is that whenever we run the stopwatch, we actually need to change the text of this text view right here. So actually in order to change the text of this text view, initially we need to reference it. So we switch back to this activity right here, or sorry, the Java class right here. And then in order to have a reference to it, we type final text view, and let's name this text view as time view. So we type time view equals find view by ID to find the view by ID, and then we type in r.id and the name of our text view is going to be time view right here, which is time_view. So we simply select it, and there we have a reference to our final text view. And I think I have misspelled it, so due to autocomplete I have made this to texture view. Actually this should be text view, and also we need to import it, and also we actually need to typecast it here. So we type text view right over here. So once this is done, we actually have a reference to the text view, so we could proceed to writing our main code. So the first thing which we need to do is that we actually have the time in seconds, and we actually need to convert it into hours, minutes and seconds, and we actually need to give a proper format so that we could add that format to this text view right here. So if we switch to this activity, so this is our text view, and we actually need to display the hours here, the minutes here, and finally the seconds in this corner right here. So in order to format it better, and in order to actually change the values, we are going to write in the code here. So in order to assign a proper format to the text view, we are going to actually write in the code. So the very first thing which we do is that we create the variables for hours and minutes, and we actually already have the variable for seconds. So let's first go ahead and create a variable for hours. So we type integer hours equals, and this is going to be seconds divided by 3600, as there are 3600 seconds in 1 hour. So we type hours equals seconds divided by 3600. Then we type minutes, so we type integer minutes equals, and minutes are going to be seconds divided by 60, but before that we type in seconds percentage 3600 divided by 60, and this is actually going to give you the proper value of minutes. And finally we create a new variable for seconds. We type it secs equals seconds mod 60. So once we have written this code to initialize variables, the next thing which we need to do is that we actually need to specify these three things in a proper format so that they could be assigned to this text view right here. So the next thing which we do is that we actually design a format for it, and we are going to save it in a new variable which is called as time. So we type string time equals string dot format, and this format is actually going to be used in order to assign a proper format to the string time. So we type string dot format, and inside it the first thing which we need to specify is going to be the actual format which we want. So in double quotes we specify the format. So we type %d, and %d is for the decimal value. Then we give a comma, or instead of comma I think colon would be a better separator, so we type colon. Then again we type %02d, and what 02d means is that we actually need 2 decimal values in that particular area. So for hours, 1 hour or one digit for an hour is enough, and for minutes, actually as the minutes vary from 0 to 60, so it is better to have the minutes displayed in 2 decimal places. And finally for the seconds, we are also going to make it display just 2 digits onto the stopwatch. So we are going to type in %02d for seconds as well. Now after this we actually need to specify the values of it. So we type here hours, as hours are going to be displayed first. Then we are going to type minutes, and then finally we are going to display these seconds. And make sure that you type secs here and not the actual seconds, and that is because these seconds are actually properly formatted. So instead of typing in seconds here, we type secs, which is the new variable we have created for tracking the seconds. And finally, once we have the string with us, we assign this string to this text view right here. So initially we have already referenced this text view, and then finally we actually need to assign the string value to this text view. So we type the name of the text view, which is nothing but the time view. So we type time view dot set text, and we simply set the text to time. So we specify time here. And also whenever the stopwatch is in running phase, we actually need to increment the seconds every time by 1. So for example, this seconds variable value should change to 1 every time 1 second passes. So in order to do that, we use a condition like if running, that means when the stopwatch is running, we actually need to increment seconds. So we type seconds plus plus, and this is actually going to increment the value of seconds variable by 1 every time this piece of code execute. But what we want to achieve is that actually we need to increment the value of second every time 1 second actually passes. So basically we want to introduce a delay of a second inside this code right here, so that whenever this code executes, it takes a delay of 1 second approximately, and after that second actually this value gets incremented. And that is because we are working with an actual stopwatch, and if we simply leave the code as it is going to actually increment the value of seconds every time this code gets executed, and the execution of this code is going to take less than a second. So it is actually better if we introduce a delay into this code. So that's it for this tutorial, and in the next tutorial we are going to learn how we could introduce a delay into this code so that an actual second is tracked and it is going to be saved in this variable right here, which is going to increment the second value by each second. So let's once again revise what we have done in this tutorial. So the first thing which we did is that we have created a new method which is called as the Runtimer Method, which is actually going to be responsible to update the text view as every second passes. So the first thing which we did is that we had a reference to the text view, as we need to update the text view each and every time. Then we have created 3 variables for hours, minutes and seconds. We have formatted them properly, and in order to display them in a proper string in a proper format, we have created a new string variable called time. Then we have used the format method, which is a basic Java method, in order to assign a proper format to a string. So we have used this code to assign a proper format to the string. Then we have finally stored the string into the time variable, and then finally, as we have a proper string which is going to display the time, we have assigned this time string to the text view so that it could be displayed. Next thing which we did is that we have checked the status of the stopwatch, that is, if the stopwatch is in running state, we actually need to increase the value of seconds every time it gets executed. So we have added seconds plus plus. Now in order to properly measure a second, we are actually going to need to introduce a delay. So in order to introduce a delay into our stopwatch, basically we are going to use 3 things. The first thing is going to be the handler, and handler is basically an Android class which you could use to schedule your code so that your code should run at some point in the future. So for example, let's say if you want to write a code but actually you want to run the code in the future instead of running it right now, so for that purpose we are going to use the handler. After the handler, we are going to use the post method. So the post method basically consists of code which we want to execute right now at the moment, and the final method which we are going to use is going to be the post delayed method. Now the post delayed method works in a similar way to the post method, except that you use it in the post code that should run in the future. So the post delayed method is basically used to cause a delay. So the next thing which we need to do is that we actually need to create the handler. That is, we need to initialize the object of the handler. That is, we create a new handler and then use the method which is called as the post and the post delayed. And you need to note that the post and the post delayed method are actually included in the handler. So the first thing which we do is that we create a handler. So in order to create a handler, we go inside this Runtimer method, which is this method right here, and right below the final, which is this final text view, we go here and create a new handler. So we type final handler. So once we have used the handler, we actually need to import it. So we press Alt Enter, and actually we are going to import the handler from Android.os package, and that is because there are 2 handlers. One is present in the Java package and one of them is present in the Android package, and we are going to go with the handler which is present in the Android package. So we simply select it, and once we have imported handler, we could go ahead and write in the code. So we type handler equals new handler, and within the parentheses we are not going to mention anything, and we are going to give a semicolon right after it. Now the next thing which we need to do is that we actually need to use the post method inside the handlers so that we are able to execute the code which we want to execute at the moment. So in order to create a post method, we type handler, as this method is present in the handler class. Then we type dot post, and make sure that you don't use post delayed right now, and we are going to use the post method. So we use the post method, and inside it we create a new runnable object. So we type new runnable, and as you could see, when we auto complete it, we are going to get a set of code on our screen, and we are going to use the same code in order to complete our application. So the next thing which we need to do is that, as it is showing us an error right over here, we actually need to put a semicolon right here. And once we have the semicolon, what we need to do is that we need to copy this code right here, and we actually need to cut it, and we need to place it in this run method right here. So we simply paste it here, and after this line of code is executed, actually we need to use the post delayed method so as to cause a delay after every second. So in order to do that, we go right below here, and then we type handler dot post delayed. And as you could see, there are two parameters to the post delayed method. First is the runnable r, which is the runnable object, and the next one is going to be the delay which we want to introduce. So the first thing which we mention in the parameter is this, as we are dealing with this object, and then finally we are going to display, or we are going to print out the delay which we want to mention. So for example, as we want to delay this line of code for 1 second, so we are going to introduce a delay of 1 second, and actually the unit which is present here is going to be in milliseconds. So for 1 second you actually need to type in 1000 milliseconds. So once we are done with this, we are done with the code. So basically, let's revise once again what we have done. So basically we had the code for a simple stopwatch, but the thing was that we actually wanted to introduce a delay, and in order to introduce a delay we have used handlers. So basically the main function of handlers is to allow us to schedule a code. So whenever we want to execute a code in the near future, we use the handlers, and inside handlers we have two methods which we are going to use. The first method was the post method, the second method was the post delayed method. Now the post method contains the code which we want to execute at the moment, and the post delayed method consists of code which we want to execute in the near future. Now we have created a handler here, then we have used the post method, and to this post method we have passed in the runnable object, and inside it we have actually specified the code which we want to run right now. And after it, finally we have used the post delayed method so as to introduce a delay, and as you could see, in order to introduce a delay of 1 second, we have passed in 1000 milliseconds, and that is because 1000 milliseconds is equal to 1 second. And for the first parameter we have mentioned this, that is because we are dealing with the current object. So once we are done with this, we are good to go, and we could finally run our application on the emulator. But before that, one more thing which we need to do is that we need to go into this onCreate, and we actually need to call in this method. That is because it is not being called any time. So we go inside onCreate right over here, and we type in Runtimer. So once this is done, we are good to go. So we save the code and we run this application on our emulator. So as you could see, our application is up and running on the emulator, and there is our stopwatch, and when we click the start button, as you could see, the stopwatch started and the seconds are moving. Now if we click stop, it is eventually going to stop our stopwatch, and when we click on reset, it is going to reset the stopwatch to 0. So that's how you create a basic stopwatch application in Android, and actually you could do it more better than what I have done. Actually you could use a very cool looking background, and actually you could reduce the size of this font, but for the sake of simplicity and for the sake of understanding, I have used a simple background and the simple text, but you could modify accordingly, and you could actually use more better buttons and more better fonts. So that's it for this tutorial, and I hope you guys understood how to create a stopwatch in Android. In this tutorial we are actually going to discuss some problems which are present in our Android application. So in the previous tutorial we have created this nice looking stopwatch application which was running fine, but if you run it on a device you will have a problem, and that is because whenever you rotate your device, it is actually going to crash this application, or it is going to reset this time right here. So for example, if your time is like 8 seconds and if you rotate your device, it is going to reset the time. So for example, if you have some time here and if you rotate your device, it is going to reset the time. So in order to understand the problem, let's go ahead and run our application. So we click the start button right here and our stopwatch is going to start. Now one thing which you could do is that you could actually also rotate your emulator. So if you are on a Windows PC, you could press Ctrl and F11 and it is going to rotate your screen. And as you could see, as soon as I rotate the screen, the timer resets back to 0. And if we rotate back by pressing Ctrl and F11, as you could see, still the timer is at 0, and actually we need to start the timer again. So our main concern here is that why such thing happened, like whenever we try to rotate our device, the timer or the stopwatch actually resets back to 0. So what happens is that whenever we are going to rotate the device configuration changes, and our Android device understands that now as the device configuration is changed on rotating the screen, actually we need to reset the main activity which we have. So what happens is that whenever we rotate the screen, the previous activity is destroyed and a new activity is started. And whenever a new activity is started, we have actually written this code right here, which is basically going to initialize the seconds value to 0, and it is going to actually initialize the status of running to be false. So basically whenever we create a new activity, is going to start from 0, and the state of the running and the state of the stopwatch is going to be not running. So in order to solve the problem, we could actually edit some configuration files, but it would be unnecessary to do so. So what we could do is that instead of changing the configuration files, we could save the current state of the activity, and we could pass in the current state of the present activity to the new activity created. So for example, whenever the stopwatch application is running, and suppose we have a time of, let's say, 9 seconds onto the stopwatch, and in that case the seconds value is 9 and the status is running equals true. So what we could do is that we could save the instance of these two things, and we could pass on these two things to a new activity. So that could be one way of doing it, and I've purposely chosen the application of stopwatch so as to show you guys what happens when we rotate a device and how it could lead to our application to crash badly. So we always need to remember that whenever we rotate our device, the configuration is going to change, the activity is going to launch, and whenever we rotate it, the activity is going to get destroyed and a new activity is going to start. And if we have a look at our new activity, it is going to initialize seconds to 0, and the value of running is going to be false. So let's go ahead and solve this issue, and our main concern here would be saving these two values into some variables so that these two values could be passed on to the new activity. So the first thing which we need to do in order to save it is that we go right here below the onCreate method, and here we create a new method which is called as the onSave instance state. So onSave instance state is going to save the value or the state of the instance. So let's go ahead and add the save instance state method. So we type public void onSave instance state, and to this we are going to pass in bundle saved instance state. So this right here is going to be our method so as to save the instance. So now the next thing which we could do is that we could actually save the instance which we want to save. So we actually need to save the value which is stored in the seconds variable, and also we need to store the value which is stored in the running variable. So we type in save instance state dot put integer, and put integer is basically used in order to save an integer value in the instance. So we type put integer, and we are going to save it in the seconds. So we type seconds in double quotes. So we type seconds, and to this we are going, and inside this we are going to save the seconds. So we type seconds here one more time, and we are going to copy the same line of code in order to store the state which is running. So we paste it here, but instead of the put int method we are going to use the put boolean method, and that is because the value of the running variable is of the type boolean. So we specify running here, and also we specify running over here. So once we have saved the values of these two things, the next thing which we actually need to do is that we actually need to get this value in the onCreate, and actually we need to pass these values to a new variable or to the new activity. So in order to pass on these methods to the newly created activity, we go inside this onCreate method right here, and right in between set content view and runtimer we type if saved instance state, if this is not equal to null, then actually we want to give new values to seconds and running. So we type seconds equal saved instance state. Now in order to get the values in the saved instance state, instead of put we are going to use get. So we type dot get integer, and as it is an integer value, and we are going to get the value which is stored in seconds. So we specify seconds here, and also in order to retrieve the value for running we type running equals saved instance state dot get boolean, and that is because it is a boolean value, and inside double quotes, as the value is stored in running, we type here running. So once everything is done, we are good to go. So we could finally save this application and run our application on the emulator. So as you could see, our application is up and running on the emulator, and now if we start the stopwatch, it is going to start. And the next thing which we do is that we try to rotate the screen. So we press Alt F11, and as you could notice, the stopwatch is still running unlike the previous time. And if we again rotate it back to its original state, as you could see, the stopwatch still continues to run. So that's it for this tutorial, and I hope you guys understood how to create a basic stopwatch and how to handle the error associated with rotation. So for the past few tutorials, I've purposely taken the example of a stopwatch application so as to mention, or so as to explain what happens when we rotate the screen. So basically the state of the activity changes, and the activity completely gets destroyed, and we actually need to use the save instance method in order to restore the state, and we actually need to pass in the state to the new activity so that it retains its previous state. So thank you very much for watching this tutorial, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Thank you.